Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories. Today, I bring you a powerful and deeply loving asterisk. The autumn rain fell in steady sheets across Seattle, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and blurred headlights. Victoria Bennett stood at her drafting table on the third floor of her renovated Victorian home, pencil moving across paper with practiced precision. The house was quiet except for the gentle percussion of rain against the bay windows and the soft jazz playing from her vintage record player. She didn't hear the car pull up. Outside, Victoria was absorbed in her work, designing a community library for the Greenwood neighborhood, when the doorbell chimed. She glanced at her watch. 7:30 on a Tuesday evening. She wasn't expecting anyone. Diane, her business partner, had left hours ago after their design review meeting. Setting down her pencil, Victoria descended the curved staircase, her bare feet silent on the polished hardwood. Through the frosted glass panel of her front door, she could make out a tall silhouette. Something about the posture, the breadth of shoulders, sent an electric jolt through her chest. She knew that stance. 5 years had passed. Some things the body never forgets. Victoria opened the door. James Holloway stood on her porch, soaked from the rain despite the expensive wool coat draped over his shoulders. His dark hair, now touched with silver at the temples, was plastered to his forehead. Those green eyes, the ones that had once looked at her like she hung the moon, now carried a weight she didn't recognize. "Hello, Victoria." His voice was exactly as she remembered. Deep, careful, with that slight rasp that had always made her name sound like music. She stood frozen, her hand still on the doorknob. 5 years. 5 years since she'd signed those divorce papers with shaking hands. 5 years since she'd blocked his number, packed up 8 years of marriage into cardboard boxes, and sworn she'd never let anyone that close again. "What are you doing here?" The words came out steadier than she felt. "I know I should have called." James shifted his weight, and for the first time Victoria noticed he looked nervous. James Holloway, who had pitched to venture capitalists without breaking a sweat, who had built a tech empire before turning 35, looked genuinely uncertain. "I'm in Seattle for a few days. I was hoping we could talk." Talk. Victoria repeated the word as if testing its validity. "After 5 years of silence, you want to talk?" "I know I don't have the right to ask." "You're correct. You don't." She began to close the door, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the rain dripping from his coat onto her porch. Maybe it was the fact that he wasn't wearing the armor of arrogance she remembered from their final years together. Maybe it was simply that she was tired of running from ghosts. "5 minutes," she said, stepping back. "You're dripping on my porch." James entered her home with the hesitance of a stranger, though he'd helped her pick out this house 7 years ago. Back then, it had been a wreck, a fixer-upper they'd planned to restore together. She'd done it alone instead, pouring her grief and rage into every renovation. Every carefully chosen detail, he took in the changes with quiet observation. The exposed brick she'd revealed in the living room. The steel and glass staircase she'd designed herself. The walls painted in shades of cream and sage so different from the bold colors he would have chosen. "It's beautiful," James said softly. "You made it exactly what you envisioned." "What do you want, James?" Victoria crossed her arms, maintaining distance between them. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, slightly damp from the rain. "I wanted to give you this, and I wanted to ask if you'd have dinner with me tomorrow night. Just one evening. Then I'll leave Seattle, and I won't bother you again." Victoria stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "Is this about money?" "Because I'm doing fine. My firm is successful. I don't need anything from you. I know. I followed your work." At her sharp look, he clarified, not in a creepy way. "Your firm won the Sustainable Design Award last year. There was an article in Architectural Digest. You've done incredible things, Victoria." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Pride. There was genuine pride in his voice, without a trace of condescension or surprise. He'd expected her to succeed. "Why now?" she asked. "Why show up after all this time?" James looked down at the envelope in his hand. "Because I owe you the truth. The real truth about why our marriage fell apart. And because I've been a coward for 5 years, but I'm trying not to be one anymore." The jazz record had stopped playing, leaving only the sound of rain and the old house settling around them. Victoria studied the man standing in her living room. He looked different. Thinner, maybe. More tired. But there was something else. Something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Regret, yes, but also a kind of clarity. She thought about the questions she'd asked herself 1,000 times in therapy. In the lonely hours of night, in the moments when she'd pass a restaurant they used to love, what would she say if she ever saw him again? One dinner, Victoria heard herself say, "Tomorrow at 7. You choose the place, but somewhere quiet. I don't want to make a scene in public if this goes badly. Thank you." The relief in James's voice was palpable. He set the envelope on her entry table. "This is just some old photos I found. I thought you might want them." Pictures from before everything went wrong. He moved toward the door, then paused. "You look happy, Victoria. Truly happy. Whatever else happens, I'm glad for that." After he left, Victoria stood in her entryway for a long moment, staring at the envelope. Finally, she picked it up and carried it to her kitchen. Setting it on the granite counter while she poured herself a glass of wine, the photos inside were from their early years. A trip to the San Juan Islands where they'd gotten caught in a storm and laughed until they cried. Their tiny apartment in Capitol Hill with its terrible plumbing and perfect light. James's sister, Rachel's college graduation, all of them grinning at the camera, unaware of what was coming. Victoria set down one photo that made her breath catch. It was from their wedding day, but not one of the formal portraits. This was a candid shot someone had taken during the reception. She and James were on the dance floor, her head on his shoulder, his arms wrapped around her waist. The way he was looking at her in that moment, like she was the only person in the entire world. When had he stopped looking at her like that? She remembered the exact moment. It was 3 years into their marriage. He'd just closed a major funding round for his startup. They were at a celebratory dinner with investors, and she'd been telling a story about one of her first architecture projects. Halfway through, she'd realized James wasn't listening. He was checking his phone under the table, already moving on to the next deal. The next milestone. That was when she'd felt it. The first hairline, crack in the foundation of them. Victoria's phone buzzed. A text from Diane. "How did the Greenwood Library proposal go? Ready for tomorrow's presentation?" She'd forgotten she had a major client presentation in the morning. The biggest potential contract her firm had ever landed. She needed to focus, to prepare, not to be distracted by ghosts and old photographs. But as Victoria climbed the stairs back to her studio, she couldn't stop thinking about James's words. The real truth about why our marriage fell apart. What truth could possibly matter now? What could he say that would change the fundamental fact that he'd chosen his empire over her, over them, over everything they'd built together? She worked until midnight, refining her designs, but part of her mind kept drifting to tomorrow night, to whatever James Holloway had come to Seattle to say. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean. While inside her beautiful, lonely house, Victoria wondered if some truths came too late to matter. The presentation went flawlessly. Victoria stood before the Greenwood Community Board, watching their faces light up as she walked them through the library design. Sustainable materials, natural light flooding through carefully positioned windows, spaces that would serve as both sanctuary and gathering place for a neighborhood that desperately needed one. When the board chair shook her hand and said, "We'll have the contract ready by Friday," Victoria felt the familiar rush of accomplishment. Diane caught her in the parking lot, grinning. "You crushed it." "This calls for champagne." "Rain check," Victoria said, unlocking her car. "I have dinner plans." Diane's eyebrows rose. "Dinner plans? You haven't had dinner plans in 2 years. Who's the lucky person?" Victoria hesitated. She hadn't told anyone about James's visit. Just an old friend passing through town. An old friend who makes you check your reflection 3 times before leaving. Diane gestured at Victoria's outfit. A simple navy dress. Elegant but not trying too hard. "I've known you for 5 years, Vic. You wear jeans to $1 million client meetings." "This is different," Victoria sighed. "It's James." The name hung in the air between them. Diane knew everything. She'd been the one who'd held Victoria through the worst of the divorce. Who'd talked her out of selling the house and starting over somewhere new? Who'd convinced her to channel everything into building their firm? James, as in your ex-husband James? The one who nearly destroyed you? He wants to explain something. I agreed to hear him out. Diane's expression shifted from surprise to concern. Are you sure that's a good idea? You've worked so hard to move on. I know, but I think I need this closure. I need to understand what happened. Just promise me something, Diane said, gripping Victoria's arm. Don't let him rewrite history. Don't let him make excuses that somehow make you responsible for his choices. Victoria nodded, but as she drove toward the restaurant James had chosen, she felt her resolve wavering. The boathouse sat at the edge of Lake Union, a quiet seafood restaurant with windows overlooking the water. It was where James had proposed. 8 years ago, getting down on one knee, while the sunset painted the lake in shades of gold and rose. He was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table away from other diners. He stood as she approached, and she noticed he was wearing the blue shirt she'd once told him brought out his eyes. Had he remembered, or was it coincidence? Thank you for coming, James said as she sat down. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Victoria accepted a menu from their server, but didn't open it. Let's skip the small talk, James. You said you had a truth to tell me, so tell me. He nodded slowly, as if he'd expected her directness. Do you remember Rachel's senior year of college, when I started traveling more for work? Victoria remembered. That was when everything had started to unravel. You were building the company, chasing investors. I remember plenty of empty chairs at dinner. That's what I told you. James's hands were folded on the table, his knuckles white. The truth is, Rachel wasn't just struggling with her coursework that year. She was using cocaine first, then heroin. By the time I found out, she was already in deep. Victoria felt her breath catch. She'd always liked Rachel, James's younger sister. A bright, ambitious girl who'd seemed to have everything figured out. She called me one night from a hospital in Portland, James continued, his voice rough. She'd overdosed. Nearly died. The doctor saved her, but she needed intensive treatment. Real treatment, not just a 28-day program. We're talking 6 months minimum in a private facility, plus ongoing therapy and support. Why didn't you tell me? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Because I was ashamed, because my parents were gone, and Rachel was my responsibility, and I'd failed to notice she was falling apart. Because the treatment center cost $30,000 a month, and we didn't have that kind of money. Victoria did the math in her head. James, that's nearly $200,000. $210,000 for the full program, plus another $54,000 aftercare. You finally met her eyes. I liquidated everything. Our savings, my company stock options, the college fund we'd started. I took out loans against our house. Every speaking engagement, every consulting gig, every late night at the office was me trying to keep us afloat while paying for Rachel's treatment. The restaurant suddenly felt too warm. Victoria reached for her water glass with shaking hands. You told me you were investing in the company. You said the long hours were about securing our future. I lied. And every day I lied to you, the distance between us grew. You thought I was choosing work over you, and I let you think that because the alternative was admitting that I'd gambled our entire financial future on saving my sister. I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd resent Rachel, or worse, you'd leave both of us. So instead, you pushed me away. Victoria felt tears burning behind her eyes. You made me feel like I didn't matter. Like our marriage was just an inconvenience to your ambition. I know, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. James's voice cracked. By the time Rachel completed the program and got sober, you and I were already broken. We were living in the same house but existing in different worlds. I'd destroyed your trust and I didn't know how to rebuild it. Victoria thought back to those final months. The separate bedrooms, the polite, distant conversations. The way they'd moved around each other like strangers. She thought he simply didn't love her anymore. The night you asked for the divorce, James said, I almost told you everything. But you look so tired, Victoria. So done with fighting. I thought maybe the kindest thing I could do was let you go. Let you build a life without me dragging you down. That wasn't your decision to make. Anger flared in Victoria's chest, hot and sudden. We were supposed to be partners. We made vows, for better or worse, remember? You should have trusted me with the truth. You're absolutely right. James didn't try to defend himself. I was a coward. I convinced myself I was protecting you. But really, I was protecting myself from your disappointment. From having to admit I wasn't the man you thought you married. The server approached to take their order, but Victoria waved her away. She needed air. She needed to think. There's something else, she said finally. Something I never told you either. James waited, his expression cautious. Mumped. 2 months after you moved out, I found out I was pregnant. Victoria watched his face go pale. I'd suspected for a few weeks but kept putting off the test. I think part of me knew and was terrified. When I finally confirmed it, I sat in that bathroom for an hour trying to figure out what to do. Victoria? James's voice was barely audible. I was going to tell you. I picked up the phone a dozen times. But then I thought about how broken we were, about bringing a child into that mess. And I wondered if maybe this was a sign, a chance for us to try again. So I decided to wait until my first doctor's appointment. I wanted to be sure everything was okay before I gave you hope. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to continue. I was 8 weeks along when I started bleeding. I drove myself to the emergency room. They did an ultrasound and told me there was no heartbeat. Miscarriage. These things happen, they said, especially with stress. James had tears running down his face now, not bothering to wipe them away. You went through that alone. I called Diane. She stayed with me. But yes, I was alone in the ways that mattered. And I couldn't help thinking that if we'd been honest with each other, if we'd trusted each other, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I wouldn't have been so stressed. Maybe our baby would have survived. You can't blame yourself for that, can't I? Just like you can't blame yourself for Rachel's addiction. Victoria met his gaze. We both carried secrets, James. We both thought we were protecting each other. And we both paid the price. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of 5 years of unspoken truth settling between them. Around them, other diners laughed and talked, oblivious to the quiet devastation at the corner table. I don't know if I can forgive you, Victoria said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm glad you told me. I spent 5 years thinking I wasn't enough for you, that I was too boring, too ordinary to compete with your ambitions. At least now I know the truth. You were always enough, James said fiercely. You were everything. And I threw it away because I was too proud and too scared to be vulnerable with the one person who loved me most. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Diane. You okay? Need an extraction? She typed back. I'm okay. Talk tomorrow? Is Rachel still sober? Victoria asked. 5 years next month. She's a counselor now, helping other people in recovery. She wanted to come with me tonight, actually. To thank you. Thank me. I didn't do anything. You did more than you know. After the divorce, Rachel asked me why I'd destroyed my marriage to save her. I told her because she was worth saving, and because that's what love looks like. It means sacrificing everything, even if the person you're saving never knows. That conversation was what finally got through to her. She got serious about recovery because she didn't want my sacrifice to be for nothing. Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe understanding. Maybe the beginning of letting go of the anger she'd carried for so long. I need time, she said, to process all of this, to figure out what it means. Of course, take all the time you need. James signaled for the check. But there's one more thing. Tomorrow afternoon, if you're willing, I'd like to show you something. It's the real reason I came to Seattle. Victoria barely slept that night. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the conversation with James over and over. Every revelation felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place, reshaping the picture of their marriage she'd carried for 5 years. At dawn, she gave up on sleep and went for a run along the waterfront. The city was just waking up, coffee shops opening their doors, early commuters hurrying toward their lives. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs ached, trying to outrun the complicated tangle of emotions in her chest. By noon, she was showered and dressed, pacing her living room while waiting for James to pick her up. He'd been cryptic about their destination, saying only that he wanted her to see something before he explained. His car pulled up at exactly 2 o'clock. Victoria grabbed her jacket and headed out before she could change her mind. Where are we going? She asked, as they drove through downtown Seattle. Fairmont, James said. Your old neighborhood? Victoria's heart skipped. She'd grown up in Fairmont, a working-class neighborhood south of the city. Her parents had worked double shifts to keep their small house, to give Victoria opportunities they'd never had. She hadn't been back in years. They drove past her old elementary school, past the corner store where she'd bought candy with carefully saved allowance money, past the park where she'd first dreamed of becoming an architect. While sketching imaginary buildings in a battered notebook, James pulled into a parking lot beside a large, abandoned building. Victoria recognized it immediately. The Fairmont Community Center. It had closed when she was in high school, a victim of budget cuts and neglect. The building was a relic from the 1960s. All brick and tall windows, with good bones beneath the decay. "Why are we here?" Victoria asked. Instead of answering, James got out of the car. Victoria followed him to the front entrance, where a woman was waiting. She was in her late 20s, with James's same green eyes and a nervous smile. "Rachel?" Victoria breathed. "Hi, Victoria." Rachel stepped forward, then hesitated, as if unsure whether a hug would be welcome. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be strange." Victoria looked between the siblings. Rachel looked healthy, vibrant even, so different from the struggling college student Victoria remembered. "James said you wanted to thank me?" "I did." "I do." Rachel twisted her hands together. "I know what my addiction cost you." James never said it directly, but I figured it out. The financial stress, the secrets, the way it destroyed your marriage. That's on me. "Rachel, no," Victoria started, but Rachel held up a hand. Please let me finish. I've been working through the 12 steps, and one of them is making amends. I can't change what happened. I can't give you back those years or the pain you went through. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm grateful. James's sacrifice saved my life, and in a weird way, so did you. I don't understand. When James told me why you got divorced, and he explained that he'd chosen saving me over being honest with you, something clicked. I realized that addiction doesn't just destroy the person using. It destroys everyone who loves them. I got serious about recovery because I couldn't stand the thought of causing more damage. Your pain woke me up. Victoria felt tears threatening. I'm glad you're okay, Rachel. Truly. Whatever else happened, I'm glad you're still here. Rachel smiled, then glanced at James. Should I tell her, or do you want to? Tell me what? Victoria looked at the abandoned building behind them. James pulled a set of keys from his pocket. After the company finally stabilized, after I'd paid off all the debts and rebuilt what we'd lost, I started looking for ways to give back. I thought about what mattered most to both of us before everything fell apart. Do you remember the night we drove through this neighborhood during our first year of marriage? Victoria remembered. They'd been young and broke and optimistic about everything. We talked about opening a community center someday. A place where kids from neighborhoods like this could learn skills, get mentorship, have opportunities. You specifically talked about teaching architecture and design, about showing kids that they could build literally anything they could imagine. James held out the keys. 3 months ago, I bought this building. I've spent the last 2 months working with city planners, with contractors, with education specialists. And yesterday, I finalized the paperwork. He pressed the keys into Victoria's hand. This building now belongs to the Bennett Foundation for Architectural Education. You're listed as the founder and director. There's an endowment large enough to run it for at least 20 years. To pay competitive salaries for instructors. To provide free programming for any kid who wants to learn. Victoria stared at the keys in her palm, unable to process what she was hearing. James, this is insane. I can't accept this. You can, and I hope you will. But let me be clear about something. James stepped closer, his voice intense. This isn't a grand gesture to win you back. This isn't me trying to buy your forgiveness or manipulate you into giving me another chance. This is me honoring who you are and who you've always been. You're someone who sees potential in broken things, who takes something abandoned and transforms it into something beautiful and useful. You did it with our house. You do it with every building you design. And you did it with me, even if I was too stupid to appreciate it at the time. I don't know what to say. Victoria looked up at the building, seeing past the boarded windows and graffiti-covered walls to what it could become. Her mind was already racing with possibilities. Natural light studios, computer labs with design software, a library filled with architecture books, spaces where kids could build models and dream big dreams. Say you'll think about it, James said softly. The foundation is legally yours, whether you run it yourself or hire someone else to do it. Whether you ever speak to me again or not. This isn't conditional on anything. It's just what should have happened 5 years ago, if I'd been half the man you deserved. Rachel cleared her throat. I should mention that I've been volunteering with youth programs for the last year. If you decide to move forward with this, I'd like to help. Not as a paid employee, just as a volunteer. I think I owe it to these kids to show them that recovery is possible, that second chances exist. Victoria walked toward the building, trailing her fingers along the brick wall. The architecture was solid, the structure sound. With the right renovations, the right vision, this place could be extraordinary. She thought about the girl she'd been, growing up in this neighborhood, dreaming of buildings she could design, but having no clear path to that future. When I was 10, Victoria said, not turning around, I told my fourth-grade teacher I wanted to be an architect. She said that was a nice dream, but I should probably think about something more realistic, something more suited to girls from neighborhoods like mine. She turned back to James and Rachel. I never forgot that. Every building I've designed, every award I've won, part of me has been proving her wrong. But this could be bigger than that. This could help hundreds of kids prove people wrong. So you'll do it? James asked, hope lighting his face. I'll think about it. Seriously, think about it. Victoria clutched the keys tighter, but I need to do this on my own terms. My vision, my leadership. If I decide to move forward, I can't have you hovering in the background trying to control things. Agreed. The foundation paperwork gives you complete autonomy. I'm not on the board. I have no decision-making power. This is yours. They spent the next hour walking through the building. Despite the neglect, Victoria could see the potential in every room. James and Rachel followed quietly, letting her explore, letting her imagination transform the space in what would have been the original gymnasium. Victoria stopped in the center of the empty floor. Dusty light filtered through high windows, illuminating particles floating in the air like stars. I lost myself in our marriage, she said suddenly. Somewhere between trying to support your dreams and dealing with our problems, I forgot about my own dreams. This feels like finding something I didn't even know I'd lost. You never lost yourself, James said. I just failed to see you clearly. But I see you now, Victoria. I see exactly who you are and what you're capable of. And it's extraordinary. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Not forgiveness, not quite, but something softer than anger. Something that felt like release. I need you to understand something, she said, turning to face him fully. What you did, keeping secrets, lying to me, that broke us. And learning the truth now doesn't magically fix that. You stole my choice. You decided what I could handle and what I couldn't. And that wasn't fair to either of us, I know. But I also understand why you did it. And I understand that I wasn't blameless either. I should have fought harder for us. I should have demanded the truth instead of just accepting the distance between us. She took a deep breath. So here's what I'm proposing. We start over, not as husband and wife. Not as lovers trying to recapture something that's gone, but as two people who once loved each other very much and who maybe can learn to be friends. Honest friends. James's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I would like that more than you know. No grand expectations. No pressure. Just coffee sometimes. Maybe occasional dinners where we actually talk about real things. Can you do that? Yes. Absolutely yes. Rachel, who'd been watching quietly from the doorway, spoke up. For what it's worth, I think you're both incredibly brave. Most people would rather hold on to anger than risk being vulnerable again. Victoria smiled at her. We've all been through enough. I think we've earned a little peace. They locked up the building and stood together in the parking lot as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon. Seattle spread out before them, a city of reinvention and second chances. I should get back, Victoria said. I have a lot to think about. This foundation. What it could mean. It's not a decision I can make lightly. Take all the time you need, James said. But Victoria? Whatever you decide about the foundation, about us, about everything, I want you to know something. These last 5 years, every success I had felt hollow because the person I most wanted to share it with was gone. Not because I needed you to validate me, but because you taught me that success without connection is just empty achievement. You made me better. You made me want to be better. And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for the time we had, even if I did mess it up. Victoria felt tears finally spill over. You didn't mess up everything. We had good years. Beautiful years. I need to remember those too, instead of just focusing on how it ended. She stepped forward and hugged him. A real hug. The first physical contact they'd had in 5 years. James held her carefully as if she might break, and for a moment, they were just two people who'd loved and lost and survived. When they separated, Victoria wiped her eyes and laughed. "Look at us. A mess. The best kind of mess," Rachel said warmly. As Victoria drove home alone, the keys to the Fairmont Community Center resting in her cup holder, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but something close. Hope, maybe. The sense that the future held possibilities she couldn't yet imagine. She thought about James, about the man he'd been and the man he was becoming. About the truth that had finally, belatedly, set them both free. She thought about Rachel, fighting her way back from the edge, transforming pain into purpose, and she thought about that building, waiting to be transformed. Waiting for someone to see past its broken windows and crumbling facade to the potential within. Victoria pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment. Engine off, looking at the house she'd rebuilt with her own hands. She'd done it once before. She could do it again. Inside, she made herself tea and sat at her kitchen table with a blank sketch pad. By midnight, she had preliminary drawings for the Fairmont Community Center covering every surface of her kitchen. By dawn, she had a business plan, a curriculum outline, and a list of potential instructors. When Diane arrived at 9 for their morning meeting, she found Victoria surrounded by papers, eyes bright with exhaustion and excitement. "What happened?" Diane demanded. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Victoria said, grinning. "Diane, what would you say if I told you I wanted to start a foundation? A place where kids can learn architecture and design, where we can show them that they can build anything they dream of." Diane looked at the sketches spread across the table, then back at Victoria's face. "I'd say it's about time you remembered why you became an architect in the first place. Not just to design buildings, but to build futures. James gave me a building, a whole building with funding and everything, and you're sure this isn't some elaborate scheme to get back together?" Victoria shook her head. "No strings. No expectations. Just a gesture that says he finally understands who I am and what matters to me? Then I say we get to work." Diane pulled out her laptop. "Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." 3 months later, the Fairmont Community Center held its grand opening. The building had been transformed, its bones honored, while every surface gleamed with new purpose. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the studios with natural light. State-of-the-art computers lined the design labs. The walls were covered with inspiring quotes and images of famous buildings from around the world. Victoria stood at the entrance, greeting students and their families, teachers and donors, city officials and media. Diane stood beside her, beaming with pride at what they'd accomplished. James arrived late, slipping in quietly at the back of the crowd during Victoria's opening speech. She spotted him and smiled, a genuine smile of gratitude and affection. Not romantic love, not anymore, but something deeper, perhaps. Respect, understanding, the kind of fondness that grows from truly seeing another person. Flaws and all, and accepting them anyway. Rachel was already there, leading a tour group of teenagers through the building, telling them her story, showing them that mistakes don't have to define you. As the sun set over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Victoria stood in the main studio and watched kids bent over drafting tables, their faces intense with concentration as they sketched their first building designs. Some would become architects. Some would discover other passions. But all of them would leave knowing that someone believed in their potential. James appeared beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You did it. This place is everything you imagined and more." "We did it," Victoria corrected. "Your gesture made it possible. My vision made it real. Rachel's story will inspire these kids. That's what makes it work. Friends?" James asked, echoing her words from 3 months ago. "Friends," Victoria confirmed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching dreams take shape in the hands of children who deserve to build their futures. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle on, each one a small beacon of hope in the darkness. Victoria thought about the girl she'd been, the woman she'd become, and the person she was still becoming. She thought about broken things that could be made beautiful again, about second chances and new beginnings, about the difference between closure and healing. She had built something permanent here. Not just a building, but a legacy. Not just a program, but a promise to every kid who walked through these doors. You are worth the investment. Your dreams matter. You can build anything, and standing there, surrounded by the hum of creativity and possibility, Victoria realized that James's gesture hadn't changed everything after all. It had simply revealed what was already there, waiting beneath the surface. Her own strength. Her own vision. Her own capacity to transform pain into purpose. The gesture hadn't saved her. She'd saved herself, but it had given her something equally valuable. The chance to help others do the same. As the evening wound down and the last families departed, Victoria locked the doors of the center and stood on the front steps, keys in hand. Tomorrow, they would return. New students, new dreams, new buildings waiting to be imagined into existence. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment of quiet pride for the woman she'd become, for the truth that had finally, painfully set her free, for the gesture that had honored her, not by trying to fix the past, but by investing in the future she'd always dreamed of creating. Victoria got in her car and drove home through the glittering city streets, a small smile playing at her lips. The past was finally at peace, and the future was hers to build. One dream, one student, one beautiful structure at a time. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like. Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.